The funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Friends of 4, 10, and 12.
They can get a better education with me than they can in school. I'm positive.
The homeschool movement is coming out of the closet, and public school officials are concerned. Tonight, we look at the homeschool in Idaho, what it means to the kids and to the public schools. Good evening. By one perhaps conservative estimate, there are 2,000 children in Idaho who are receiving their education at home. Most are being taught at home by their parents. A new legal opinion by the Idaho Attorney General has clarified the powers of local school boards to provide some regulation of these homeschool curriculums and teacher competence. It's a legal opinion that seems sure to open up again the old question of how much control the state should have over people who decide their kids can get a better education at home than they can in the public school system. State School Superintendent Jerry Evans has repeatedly tried to get the Idaho legislature to toughen up the law relating to home schools and private schools. So far, the legislature has been unwilling to even pass a law requiring such schools to register with the state. There were a lot of reasons, of course, for the rapid growth of the home school, but almost every homeschooler will admit to a basic dissatisfaction with the public school system. And of course, many are teaching at home for religious reasons. Tonight, we look at this homeschool movement in Idaho and the questions it's raising about the public school system. Producer Bruce Reichert has visited a homeschool in the Boise area. It's one of the few in this area. We begin tonight with his report.
A new school year is starting, and Idaho's classrooms are filled with students hitting the books. But for an increasing number of Idaho's children, school has a decidedly different look to it.
These forces is worth, and then we use the Pythagorean theorem.
They're called home schools, and while the idea may be as old as Aristotle, to many people, home schools represent a subversive fringe element intent upon the destruction of our democratic ideals. But others, like educator-author John Holt, see home schools as the wave of the future. Holt estimates that the number of families educating their children at home will climb to almost 500,000 by the end of the decade. Kevin Harrington of East Boise is in some ways representative of that growing number of Idahoans who have said no to Idaho's public school system.
We spend more time in Bible study. We spend more time in Christian education. We spend less time in filler junkie work that teachers are often forced to do or they feel they have to do, you know. And so therefore the children like school very much. They want to do school. There's no motivation problem. It's quite harmful, particularly in the junior high, in the senior high school times, for teenagers to be so isolated from the rest of society. Typically you'll find teenagers losing their interest in being friends with little children. It's very artificial. Around here we have real live little kids for real live older teenagers to see and to relate to. And this greatly avoids the hardness of heart that I have seen in many teenagers. We have chickens and we have cats that interfere every once in a while, you know. But I think there's a more cohesive pulling together of society when you have all ages together. I really do.
Critics point to the lack of certified teachers and to the lack of social interaction with other children as major drawbacks to home schools. But to the Harvard-educated Harrington, these arguments won't wash.
If you isolate children in a room and they all think of themselves as being children or teenagers, you know, they get to feeling against the teacher or, you know, this peer group pressure baloney. And it just is ruining our children across the nation. It's ruining them. I can't imagine anything ruining them any faster. I felt this at Capitol High School. I was pouring my heart out to teach these kids, but their friendships was totally destroying everything I was doing. They could not learn because of their friendships. Now, a lot of people think, oh, we have to foster peer relationships. I think that's not true. I think the peer relationships among teenagers in this country is far too strong for their own good as well as the rest of society.
Academically, at least, his 6 children don't seem to suffer from being taught at home. Test scores consistently rate them in the top 2 or 3% in the nation.
The elementary school is the easy part, and you can just race through that, at least on some subjects. But later, it gets a lot harder, and so why just go easy, 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 and then smack you down with the hard stuff? And so I like to be able to go put my own speed.
Basically, if I had finished and the others hadn't, I had nothing to do. And so in my second year, I just went ahead in my math book and I got the assignments done way far ahead of time, you know. And so then when the assignment came due, I just rip it out of the book and hand it in. But when the teacher found out about that, she stopped me from doing that. So I think that's one advantage I like about this school.
33 states have laws allowing students to learn at home. While the law in Idaho is considered vague, this much does seem clear with regard to home schools, that children between the ages of 7 and 16 must be in some type of school setting, that the subjects taught must be comparable to those taught in public schools, and that the initial authority in such matters rests with the local school board. Unlike many homeschoolers, Kevin Harrington has worked closely with his school board.
They wanted me to do continuing education. They also wanted me to have a good curriculum. They wanted me to have up-to-date books. They wanted me to have a plan, and we had no trouble satisfying them in terms of curriculum and plans and educational philosophy.
In Harrington's school, academics and work go hand in hand. The children have plowed, fertilized, irrigated, and will soon harvest the family cornfield. The money from the harvest will allow them to purchase a telescope. Several years ago, they started growing sprouts. They are now the largest producer of sprouts in southwest Idaho. And 6 months ago, the children began showing an interest in a soybean product called tofu, which the family is now manufacturing.
The major thing is the kids don't see a difference between work and schoolwork, and they like both. And most kids don't like both. They don't like work and they don't like schoolwork.
It's no secret the homeschool movement is causing some concern among public school educators. They frequently question the quality of the education and for the children at least, the lack of social interaction. Idaho's top public school official is Jerry Evans, the state superintendent of public instruction. Let me go back to that Attorney General's opinion I mentioned first, Superintendent Evans. Why is that so important?
Well, for the last 2 or 3 years, we've had a number of questions from local school districts in terms of what they should do when parents approach the school district or the school board with the proposition of educating their children at home. They really want to know what the compulsory attendance law requires and what their responsibilities are under that law. So it's, first of all, a question, is the compulsory attendance law in Idaho a valid, enforceable law? And I think the answer to that question is pretty well provided in this opinion.
And the answer is yes.
And the answer is yes, and it goes on beyond that and spells out some of the responsibility.
Well, in essence, as I understand it, it sort of restates the belief that you've had for a long time that local school boards do have the responsibility and the power, if you will, to look at these home schools, to pass judgment on their curriculum and the competence of the teachers. Is
Yes.
that it in a nutshell?
That's pretty much it. I think the opinion makes it very clear that the local school board must determine that the children who are of school age are enrolled in a public, private, or parochial school, and those who are not, then the local school board must satisfy itself that those children are receiving instruction in the courses that are commonly taught in the public schools, and that the quality of that instruction is comparable with that is provided in the local school district, and that the amount of time being spent is the same as the time that would be spent had those children been enrolled in the public schools.
What are your concerns with these home schools?
Well, Mark, I like to talk about schools pretty much in the language that's in the opinion. Schools are public, private, or parochial. And the parents satisfy that legal requirement by enrolling their children in any one of those 3 types of school. Beyond that, there's home instruction. And I really like to say home instruction rather than home school, because school carries just a little different connotation. and that the local school board has a different responsibility when the children are enrolled in a private or parochial school than when the children are being instructed at home.
What's the difference?
The difference is if it's a school, public, private, or parochial, the law is pretty clear in terms of all of those who teach must have a certificate. It does not say that with respect to the instruction that's offered in the home.
Okay. So is that one of your concerns about this home instruction?
My concern is that children who are of school age are receiving an educational program that is at least comparable with that is offered in the public schools. And I would be the first one to say that there are some parents who may be able to provide, at least at some levels of instruction, a program that may be very comparable with that's provided in the public schools. I would be very hesitant to say that all parents would be able to do that.
How about the numbers? Do you even know how many kids are out there being instructed at home?
We do not. We've had a bill before the legislature on 2 or 3 occasions that would attempt to find out how many children are being educated in public schools, private schools, parochial schools, and in the home instructional programs. In every case, it seems to run into some very serious objection. It appears in the minds of many to fly into the face of the separation of church and state, and it's largely an issue that those who oppose our legislation say it's none of the state's business. We think we could deal with the whole situation if simply we were all better informed. I know that a number of our schools are not as good as they could be, but it seems to me that many of those who elect to educate their children at home are dealing with a broader opposition than just to the local public school. They're opposed to many of the forces that are in effect in our society.
Well, finally, let me just ask you, it sounds like you still would like some legislation to help you get a handle on what some people see as a problem.
Mark, I think some legislation would be very helpful. I'd have to tell you that I've tried on 3 different occasions very seriously to take a piece of legislation to the legislature that would just give us some information about these matters, and have been very unsuccessful. So unless there's a tremendous change in the general public feeling toward these matters, I don't intend to go back to the next session with another proposal.
Well, we'll come back, sir. Thank you. Let's turn now to the views of a homeschooler. Larry Olson, along with his wife, teaches his 4 school-age children at home. The children are ages 8 to 14. Mr. Olson, who lives in Buell, Idaho, is also president of the Idaho Family Education Association. You just heard Superintendent Evans talk about the Attorney General's opinion that deals with some of these matters. What do you make of what the Attorney General has said, Mr. Olson?
I haven't had an opportunity to really study that opinion yet, but it has been my position for a long time that the state of Idaho has had some fairly good laws regarding education in general. And most homeschoolers are very supportive of public education and see the need of it, but they have found an opportunity in which they can enhance the education of their children by doing it at home. I seriously question the efficacy of determining home education as home instruction rather than a school. I think that there are some exceptions to that existing in the state today. I also believe that the state and homeschooling in general ought to be working close together, as Mr. Evans has said. We do need more information, and the Idaho Family Education Association is in existence to help provide that information.
Well, let me just back up here for a moment and ask you why you started teaching your youngsters at home.
I think I would be dishonest if I said that I had no objection to the public school system. There were some concerns that we had, not just in our local district, but over the country as we have traveled and lived over the years. We've had some very honest concerns about our education. I've been a teacher, a principal, a college instructor in teaching, in training teachers, and I see some real problems in education.
Well, give me a couple of for instances.
Well, I think my most basic problem with education today is simply that we're taking our children into an artificial world to teach them facts, and we're not really challenging them in some key areas of life that can best be taught in the home. Many of my children, we live in the country, and many of my children have left home before daylight, got home after dark on the bus, and the interaction in the family was seriously hampered because of their absence. We found an opportunity in our home to travel because of my business, to spend a lot more time with our children and become a real family unit, as well as get some quality education through homeschooling that we couldn't achieve through the public school.
So there really is an element here, and I'll ask you to speak, if you can, a little bit for other people who approach these things as you do. There is a basic disenchantment with the public school system.
Well, I think that's obvious. There are some great contradictions, raging on TV and the newspapers today. Just the other day, we had one study come out where they recommended that we put a heavier emphasis in science with our young people. And then 2 days later, the newspaper tells of another study coming out saying that that's not what we need. We need more education in the English language. And the whole country is in upheaval over education. And I think that the upheaval itself is a detriment to our society in general. I think there are some very easy answers. And they may not be easy to implement because of our system. But I think as parents and teachers and school boards get together and identify what the mores of society are and just how the public school can help affect that, we'll have a lot better situation to deal with.
Mr. Olson, let me ask you finally, there's a feeling on the part of someone that everyone who does this, teaching at home I mean, is a member of some far-out cult or a religious fanatic, or there must be some sort of sinister reason why they want to take their kids out of the public schools. Obviously, you don't look like a member of a far-out cult, but I feel compelled to ask you that question anyway. Is that a problem for people like yourself?
As I've become more acquainted with other homeschoolers in this state and in other states, I have to say that there are a few who do fit either end of those fringes. We've got some bleeding liberal people who want to take their children away simply because they want the easier lifestyle and they don't like structure. We have some people who are more or less ultra conservative who have reasons for educating their children at home that have more to do with spite and revenge against the system than they do in really educating their children. But by and large, I think the majority of home educators are dedicated, educated people themselves who have a sincere love and desire of teaching and who want to teach their own children for that opportunity in itself.
Well, we'll come back, sir. Thank you. Finally now, let's get the view of a school board member. The Nampa, Idaho School Board earlier this year was interested in pursuing legal action against a home school in the Nampa area. The Canyon County prosecuting attorney reviewed the case and decided against prosecution because the state law concerning private and home schools was, to quote the prosecuting attorney in Canyon County, simply too ambiguous. Ted Comstock is a longtime member of the Nampa School Board and is now the president-elect of the National School Boards Association. Mr. Comstock, let me ask you first, does this increase in the number of home schools indicate some serious problem with public schools?
Mark, I choose to believe that this is not so much an expression of dissatisfaction with public schools as it has been a reawakening of some fundamental values, some fundamental opinions that homes and people hold that has stimulated their interest in creating some home instruction. I believe that our public schools are very excellent. They have done more for more people than any place else on the face of this earth. And I think that the expression that it may be dissatisfaction with the schools, I don't accept that as a valid statement. I think that the homeschool movement comes from a different source within the homes and the people who are interested in that.
More a return to what some people call the basics. Is that right?
I think it's more than that. I think it is some of the fundamental religious aspects, which of course public schools cannot touch. We are forbidden from investigating the areas of religion that many of the home schools are interested in. So I think that it comes from more than the return to basics, which certainly is a current interest.
Well, you heard Kevin Harrington, the fellow on the videotape at the beginning of the program, and Mr. Olson here talk about the kind of education they're offering their kids. Are you satisfied that those kids, knowing what you know about them here, are getting the kind of education they should be getting in that home environment?
I think that it is necessary to look at every single home instruction program in its own light. From the film strip that we saw here, I was impressed with probably the quality of the education, the sincerity of the people. I don't think that that is necessarily representative, nor can we depend on it to be representative of homeschool instruction. Very few of us are Harvard graduates with the probable educational background to carry out a program in our home. As you're aware from the ruling, that most states recognize the right of home schools to exist so long as comparability exists. But the fact that comparability is going to be very difficult to achieve.
You mean by
in home.
comparability, you mean the instruction at home would be comparable to the instruction in the public school?
That's right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what responsibility then should a local school board, like the one you sit on, have in ensuring that that comparability is there?
It appears to be the legal responsibility of the local school board to make that determination. It's not whether we would like it. It, in fact, was a rather an onerous task. But I believe that somebody has to make that judgment. I believe that the local school district can do that with the assistance of the State Department of Education. They have regulations that prescribe what curriculum, what length of school shall exist. And with this as a background of criteria, it can be done, and I believe that it must be done.
Well, on that point, let me open it up, gentlemen, and go back to Mr. Olson. Are homeschoolers comfortable with the idea of the local school board having some major say in what goes on in your home school?
I think here in Idaho, we've always been under the impression that the state has the responsibility to ensure comparable education. The big question is, how do they do that? And there isn't an answer to that question yet. The Home Education Association or Family Education Association hopes to develop some criteria in which we might assist the state superintendent of schools in assessing that need and the desirability of how that is to take place. Many people would have a very strong objection to a school board marching into their home and disturbing the sanctity of that institution to check on the curriculum of the children in that home. I think there are better ways that can be achieved.
How can we do it, Mr. Evans?
Well, Mark, we've on a couple of occasions at least tried to get some information so we would simply know who was responsible for the education, the number of children that were being educated in that fashion, and the approximate grade level at which they were working. We've never been able to get that through the legislature. I think it's always interesting.
Let me just interrupt to ask Mr. Olson, would you object to that? That sort of legislation that would give Mr. Evans that kind of information?
I wouldn't object as long as the criteria for obtaining that information was acceptable to the home education institution.
Okay, well, it sounds like we're in a semantic argument here, but go ahead, Mr. Evans.
Mark, I don't think any of us envision the local school board or local school administrators or someone from the state marching in to inspect, so to speak. I think there's simply a desire to make sure that the comparability is being satisfied. I always find it interesting when we talk about home instruction programs, the number of examples where the teacher is a Harvard graduate or someone who is as well qualified as Mr. Olson is. Those I think we can deal with. These are reasonable people. I think they want for their children as much or more than we're offering in the public schools.
It's the people who are not the Mr. Olsons and the Harvard graduates that you're worried about.
That's absolutely right. And I don't know how we go about dealing with those people. We've just found no way that we can begin to get the information from them that we need to determine this comparability.
How do we deal with that, Mr. Olson?
Well, I think a lot of the people that he's talking about have a basic instinctive fear of government. One of the hopes of the association is that as these people filter and flow to the association for help, and they are doing this, that we, through a process of education, can soften that job for the state superintendent. Also, we can help educate these people to the needs of the type of education they need to have in their home and make recommendations and serve as a liaison between any factions that may develop. And I see that as a real value in helping to assess just what the state superintendent's concerns are in the state and how to help move this process along where these people can be properly educated on the subject.
Will that move the process along?
I'm not sure. Some of these people apparently are being attracted to this association. Again, I'm wondering about those who aren't attracted to participate in any way. Those are the ones that you must worry the most about. We do have a pretty heavy responsibility for a system of free common schools spelled out in the Constitution, and we have a compulsory attendance law that really is a law for everyone. And there's a fairly broad way of satisfying that law if we are able to determine that the courses are being offered and the instruction is comparable and the time is the appropriate time. But we've been kept out of making that determination. Local school boards have been in a tremendously difficult situation in the last several years, because as they go to these people and say, your children must either be in school or we must have some basis upon which to determine that what you're doing is comparable with that's being offered in our schools, and the answer basically is it's none of your business. Yep. And that has been the situation that people like Mr. Comstock and others have had to deal with, and largely the situation that prompted the request for this opinion.
Let me go back to Mr. Comstock and just ask you, if I were to come to your school board and say that I wanted to teach my kids at home, what would you want to know about what I'm going to do?
We would, first of all, look at the curricular offerings. We would like to know what you are teaching, the time frame that you are teaching. In other words, it is required, and I think a reasonable requirement, that school children be in a prescribed length of time. So curriculum, the time frame, the qualifications of the teacher, the resources that they have at their disposal, the kinds of services that they can afford to the child to make it a full education, and the safety of the buildings, the premises itself. There are a number of these criteria that I think that it's the responsibility of the state through its local districts to ascertain.
Well, when you have someone that you know is teaching at home or wants to, do you have trouble getting that sort of information from them?
Yes, we did. We did indeed. We never were able to determine the exact number of students in this home school. We faced the same difficulties that have been cited here in getting a plan that indicated the length of the school day, the number of courses that would be offered, and the kinds of instruction provided in that setting.
Mr. Olson, doesn't the state have a legitimate interest in finding out that sort of information?
I think the state is obligated by law to have some information. I'm not sure it's all of the information he's given us by law. I do feel, however, that we will continue to have problems with these families in giving that information until they have been relieved of their fears as to what that information is going to be used for, how the judgments are going to be rendered against them or in their favor, and the type of individuals that are going to be rendering those judgments.
Well, I'm sorry, on that point we're going to have to leave it there. Mr. Comstock and Mr. Olson and Mr. Evans, we thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate it. That's our time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.